So my name is Ioannis. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm here with MISI for the last couple of years. I'm faculty. My research area is transportation logistics with focus on maritime investments, port investments, and all war type of things. Today I'm going to give you a short presentation. I'll try to keep it in the next 20 minutes, because the slot is until 2:30, on infrastructure and backbone services for GVCs. It was a very, very interesting morning. Actually, I'm really pleased that we had some of the speakers giving a background of the topic. And I think that Zelina's presentation that attracted most of the questions was a very good introduction for me, so I have to skip quite a few things. So what I will try to cover today is basically, you can read it on the screen, but I will try to do it not so much from a too theoretical point of view, but through a number of practical examples. I come from Greece. I see some of you nodding like, oh man, okay. But I can show you how, coming from a troubling nation and country, GVCs have started to work, okay? And I will try to show it, along with some other examples, what sort of research we managed to do here a couple of years ago along the same lines. GVCs was not what we had in mind at the time, but it lines up pretty much well with today's topic. So let me start with some key characteristics. By the way, I tried to make it as visual and not so much text, because after lunch I thought that this world map will attract more your attention. Let's try to see how GVCs have evolved through the years, right? So back in the early 19th century, most of the production or services was somewhere in Europe, and mainly the UK and northern parts of Europe. Then, of course, the UK, actually this is, I should say, back in the 1800s, late 1800s. We started from Europe, then attention and value chains moved on, production, distributions and all that, moved on to the US and Japan, followed after that. And then now we have China, we have Southeast Asia. And, you know, the world is becoming more and more connected, and this is where we are today. Are you on the same page or not? Yeah, you agree with me, or you're very silent? So if I would say a basic characteristic is that things are not static, they are evolving, they are dynamic. And the center of gravity moves around the world, you know, as centuries and decades go by. So I would like to keep that in mind, all right? That global value chains are dynamic, as everything in this world, right? So why should these be an exception? Okay, I did something stupid now. Okay. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. Now, this is a company that has come out from MIT, where they try to visualize the different structure of global value chains. Okay, the name of the company is Source Map. So this is the banana value chain. I know that during the entire morning we'll be talking about high-tech industries and manufacturing, but the banana has its own value chain, and it's a commodity, right? And as you can see, there are sources. The different colors represent, for example, the green one is where production is, and then where the customers is, and then the purple ones is where some value-adding activity takes place, because the banana now, it's not like no longer fruit, but it has a brand name, right? And it is packaged nicely. So there are a number of processes that make this unique product global. And of course, this is another example, a French nuclear plant. It has its own value chain, right? You have different, because for that plant, apart from the very high-tech technology that it's using, it must be needing some spare parts to operate that, or some other type of material to operate. And there is, the last example is Starbucks. Okay? So, and based on this, this must be quite a bit of old work here. And the reason that I'm saying it's a bit of old work, because I think Starbucks already have about 1,000 stores in China, which is not represented on this graph. Now, of course, the purpose of these kind of applications and visualization is not only to show where are my customers, where are my sources, but it's also a very interesting tool to see where are my risks, right? So if I know who are my customers, I know I can estimate. I'm not going to go through the process, but I can have an estimate of the risk. And what I mean by risk can be any risk, financial, political, operational, you name it. All right? So practically speaking, today global value chains, they follow the title of a conference that we had a couple of months ago here in KL. This is a conference that we organized, and we had global speakers coming. So you design everywhere, you make anywhere, and you deliver anywhere, right? This is what the global value chains is all about. And this is an example from GE. GE, they have innovation centers, not in one part of the world, but in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All 5 centers deal with innovation. And we have New York, we have Germany, we have China, we have India, and we have Rio, Brazil. Right? So this is only one function of GE that is globalized. It has setups all over the world in 5 different countries, practically speaking, working on innovation. Creating value, obviously, right? Now, why this is happening and what are the policy incentives that are given from those industries, you can very easily understand. Okay? Let me walk you through another interesting example that this is where Greece comes into the picture. But of course you see HP, but you will realize that how my country is involved in this. So Hewlett-Packard, last year, or a little bit, I think it was last year, early last year, they announced that they will no longer be using the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands as their distribution hub for their products for Europe. Right? So what HP was doing was to ship products from China, where everyone is manufacturing products today, all the way to Rotterdam, and then distribute them by using rail or inland or road or inland waterways to the rest of Europe. But they are no longer doing that. Where they're going now? They are going to the port of Piraeus and then using the rail connection, they distribute their products to the rest of Europe. Now, why should a company like HP move to such a decision? And this is a question. Because Greece is bankrupt, so they're giving many incentives. That could be one reason, right? Infrastructure is there, obviously. Actually, it was not there. And I will be very, very specific what I mean. Train was there, the rail connection, but I mean, the rail was there. There is a rail, obviously, but the port was not really connected with the rail. So it was like a couple of kilometers missing. So they had to fix that, and they did. In order to help you out, the biggest incentive for HP to do that was not any, of course, they had to negotiate with the Greek government maybe, or even with Costco, because a very, very interesting point here that I have not mentioned is that you're all familiar with the Chinese liner company, right? Costco. Costco? Yeah? So they actually they were given a number of incentives, and they now operate the container terminal in Piraeus. So they are the operators, right? So obviously, Costco, as a 3PL, acting as a 3PL, helped HP to redesign their global value chain, their distribution network, right? But the main reason behind this change was because of slow steaming. How many of you have heard about slow steaming? And what does it mean? It means that instead of a ship cruising at 25 knots an hour, it goes down to 19 knots an hour, or 20 knots an hour. It means that Costco is saving a lot of money because of fuel savings, right? But that is hurting Hewlett-Packard because it takes longer to reach the port of Rotterdam by at least a week. So their inventory holding costs are going higher. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but what I'm trying to show you is to give you a more systems perspective that I know even the theme is on policy here. And of course, policies are there, and we're going to see them later down, in a few slides. But there could be reasons that we have never thought of that could trigger a change in our strategy as a company or as a multinational or as a local or regional player. Am I making sense? So what we actually did last year is to try and understand how companies design their distribution networks, right? And how they can actually create flexibility in their global value chain design, right? So what we did is that we knew that now Rotterdam is no longer the gateway to Europe, but it has moved all the way down to the south. But then we tried to see, okay, is there any level of competition of of the countries, of other ports in Europe that can compete with Piraeus for different types of products? And companies can have the flexibility depending on the level of the freight rate fluctuation to say, okay, in the month of January, I will go through Piraeus, but in February, I will use, let's say, Trieste in Italy, or I will use, let's say, Rotterdam, or I can go through Gdansk or whatever. So we picked a number of different gateways in Europe, and what this slide is actually showing here is nothing else but saying that if the value of my shipment, whatever product that is up to or close to $1 million US, then Constanza for the month of March, this is with real data, by the way, all right? This is not, we've not made up the data. We have taken about 2,000 data points to come up with this. So what this is telling us is that based on the data that we have on the freight rates, and of course assuming that nothing else goes wrong, or you have no other, the rest remains constant. So the port of Constanza is your safe option, is your best alternative for containers of shipment up to 1 million. Anything above that, you can use the port of Piraeus, and so forth. So going back to Zelina's point, even though she's not here, when she was talking about countries competing against each other, you also have to have in mind that companies around the world are trying to build flexible designs So regardless of what incentives you're giving them, they will have the flexibility to hop around, if I can use the word. Okay? And of course, HP is not only using today the Piraeus as a gateway to Europe, but of course they are experimenting, and they are actually doing, using the rail connection from China all the way, I think, to Romania or Germany. So they are playing with, they are kind of thinking of, they have actually introduced this level of flexibility. Okay? So what are the incentives that you're going to give to the railway? So for those countries, I think it's going through China, maybe Kazakhstan, and Romania, and so forth. So there is 5 or 6 countries that it has to go through that rail link, right, between China and Europe. You've seen this slide earlier. So Zelina presented exactly the same slide, so I don't have to spend any time on that. But the reason that Zelina presented, of course, she presented the case of Malaysia. But again, for some reason, Singapore is number 1. So what is there that Singapore has done successfully and is leading the way? And how sustainable that is? And I know that in the discussion came that today companies are considering Singapore expensive, because indeed Singapore is becoming expensive. But at the end of the day, you need to question yourself, what is expensive? And if it is so expensive, why do companies still stay in Singapore? And as a very simple line that I can share with you is that with our partners that we have in Singapore, even they all admit that Singapore is expensive, but it is very easy to do. Infrastructure is there. Connectivity is there. There is no, I should say there is limited corruption or no corruption, right? Compared to other places. There is not too much bureaucracy. And of course, the taxes is limited. Of course, on corruption issues, the professor from NUS is more, he can talk better on that. But overall, there is an environment that has been created through a number of policies that have been put in place. So, obviously, in order to a country to be part of a global value chain and to attract investment, right, and these global players, infrastructure has to be there, which relates to transportation, IT, telecommunications, and energy, right? You can't have water shortages, for example. You cannot have energy shortages, right, and so forth. And then you need to have a number of services that can support the operations. For example, you need to have a stable legal environment, stable political environment. I can give you a very bad example of unstable tax environment. In the case of Greece, the legislation changes every month. Not literally, but it's so frequent. That is not a stable environment for companies to come and operate in. Okay? So, policy incentives, most of you are familiar with those, so I'm not really sure if I have to dig into it. Tax incentives is one, as Alina mentioned. Okay, you give tax incentives, but this is not by itself enough. Facilitating private and public partnership, PPP. It's having the legal framework to do that. Very important if you're aiming for high-skilled labor, education. Malaysia has that vision. That's why MIT is here through MISI. Okay? Corruption is also important. We talk about it, but it's nowhere, anywhere close there around the world. I did the same thing again. And the political environment, stable political environment. These are some of the factors, not all of them, but some of the factors that hopefully can lead into innovation, productivity, and you can come up with any other sort of names out there. Okay? So with that, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ioannis. It's interesting examples, eh? I mean, we've got the iPhone example this morning, but we've also got a lot of other interesting examples of why companies don't do things and what governments need to do to support and facilitate that. Okay, my next